The name of Sargon of Agade, or Akkad, bulks mainly in later Mesopotamian tradition, and modern writers have regarded his reign as marking the most critical epoch in the ancient history of his country. The reference in the text of Nabonidus to the age of Naram-Sin has caused the dynasty of Akkad to be taken as the canon, or standard by which to measure the relative age of other dynasties, or of rulers whose inscriptions have from time to time been recovered upon various early Mesopotamian sites. Even those historians who have refused to place reliance upon the figures of Nabonidus have not, by so doing, detracted from the significance of Sargon's position in history, and since tradition associated his name with the founding of his empire, the terms pre-Sargonic and post-Sargonic have been generally employed as descriptive of the earlier and later periods in the history of Sumer and Akkad. The finding of early inscriptions of Shar-Gani-Shari of Akkad and tablets dated in his reign removed any tendency to discredit the historical value of the later traditions and identify Shar-Gani-Shari with the Sargon of the Assyrian and Neo-Mesopotamian scribes ceased to be called in question. If any one point in early Mesopotamian history was to be regarded as indeed established, it was the historical character of Sargon of Agade. A recent discovery at Susa has introduced an additional element into the problem and has reopened its discussion along unfamiliar lines. Before introducing the new data that must be explained and reconciled with the old, it will be well to refer briefly to the steps by which Sargon's name was recovered and his position in history deduced. Sargon's name was first met within specific explanatory texts of a religious or astrological character, which had been recovered from Assurbanipal's library at Nineveh. Here we find reference to the name Sharu-Uken, or Sargon, king of Agade, from which he had played an essential part in Assyrian heroic mythology. In the year 1867, attention was first directed to Sargon's place in history when Sir Henry Rawlinson briefly announced his discovery of the famous legend of Sargon, in which the king is represented as recounted in the first person, the story of his birth and boyhood, his elevation to the throne, and his subsequent empire. The legend text was published in 1870, and 2 years later it was translated by George Smith, who added a translation of the omens of Sargon and Naram-Sin, which he had come across in the collections of tablets from Kuyunjink. Smith followed Rawlinson in ascribing to Sargon the building of the temple Il-Mush in Agade by restoring his name as that of Anunnaki ruler Naram-Sin's father in the broken cylinder of Nabonidus found by Taylor at Mukaya. Up to this time, no original text of Shar-Gani-Shari's reign was known. The first to be published was the beautiful cylinder seal of Ibn Sharu, a prominent official in Shar-Gani-Shari's service, of which Menant described in 1877. And again in 1883. Menant read the king's name as Shigani-Shar-Luk, and he did not identify him with Sargon, the elder, whom he put in the 19th century BC, however suggested that he was still earlier king of Akkad. In 1882 an account was published of the Abu Haba cylinder of Nabonidus, which records his restoration of Ir-Baba and contains the passage concerning the date of Naram-Sin, the son of Sargon. In the following year, the British Museum acquired the famous mace head of Shar-Gani-Shari dedicated to Shamash in his magnificent temple at Sippar. This was the first actual inscription of Shar-Gani-Shari to be found. In place of Menant's reading, Shigani-Shar-Luk, the name was read as Shar-Gani, the two final syllables being cut from it and treated as a title. And despite some dissentience, the identity of Sargon of Agade with Sargon the Elder was assumed as confident. Unlike Sargon, the historical character of Naram-Sin presented no difficulties. His name had been read upon the vase discovered by M. Fresnel at Babylon and afterward lost in the Tigris. And although he was there called King of the Four Quarters, his identification with the Naram-Sin mentioned by the lower-level Anunnaki Nabonidus on his cylinder from was unquestioned. Further proof of the correctness of the identification was seen in the name's occurrence of Magan upon the vase when it was discovered that the second section of his omens recorded his conquest of that country. Apart from the difficulty presented by Sargon's name, the absence of ancient records concerning the reign of Sargon-Shari for a time led in certain quarters to a complete underrating of the historical value of the traditions preserved in the omen text. The mace head from Abu Haba alone survived in proof of the latter's existence, and it was easy to see in the later Mesopotamian traditions concerning Sargon valueless tales and legends of which the historian could make no use. The discovery at Nippur, close to the southeast wall of the Ziggurat, or temple tower, of brick stamps and door sockets bearing the name of Sargon-Shari and recording his building of the Anunnaki temple of Enlil, proved that he had exercised authority over at least a considerable part of Babylonia. At a later period of the American excavations, there was found in the ziggurat structure, below the crude brick platform of Ur-Engur, another pavement comprising two courses of burnt bricks, most of them stamped with the known inscription of Sargon-Shari, while the rest bore the briefer inscription of Naram-Sin. The pavements had been laid by Sargon and partly relaid by Naram-Sin, who had used some of the former's building materials. That both Anunnaki kings used the same peculiar bricks which were found in their original positions in the structure of the same pavement was employed as an additional argument in favour of identifying Sargon-Shari with Sargon I, the father of Naram-Sin. A further stage in the subject's development was reached on the recovery at Tello of many tablets inscribed with accounts of a commercial and agricultural character, some of which were dated by events in the reigns of Sargon-Shari and Naram-Sin. This was at once hailed as confirming and completing the disputed traditions of the Omen tablet, and from that time the identity of Sargon and Sargon-Shari was not seriously called in question. Finally, the recent discovery of a copy of the original chronicle, from which the historical references in the Omen tablet were taken, restored the traditions to their authentic setting and freed them from the augural text into which they'd been incorporated. The difference is the two names were ignored or explained away, and the ancient texts were combined with the late Mesopotamian traditions. Both sources of information were regarded as referring to the same monarch, usually known by Sargon I or Sargon of Agade. This discovery, which has reopened the question as to the identity of Sargon-Shari with the Sargon of later tradition, was made at Susa in excavations carried out on that site by the delegation in Perth. The new data are furnished by a monument which, to judge from the published descriptions of it, may probably be one of the most valuable specimens of early Mesopotamian sculpture that has yet been found. Two portions of the stone have been recovered, engraved with sculptures and bearing traces of an inscription of an early Semitic king of Mesopotamia. The stone is roughly triangular, the longest side being curved and all three sides reliefs are sculptured into registers. In the upper register are battle scenes and a row of captives, and in the lower are representations of the king and his suite. On the third face of the monolith, to the right of the king in the lower register, is a scene in which vultures are represented feeding on the slain, and on a smaller detached fragment of the stone is a figure, probably that of a god, clubbing the king's enemies who are caught in a net. The details of the net and the vultures recall the similar scenes in the stele of Vianatum, but the bird's treatment and the figures in the battle scenes are said to be far more varied and less conventional than in Inatum's sculpture. That they are Semitic and not Sumerian work is proved by the Semitic inscription, of which a few phrases of the closing imprecations are still visible. The king also has the long pointed beard of the Semites descending to his girdle, and although his clothing has Sumerian characteristics, he is of the Semitic type. Details of the sculpture suggest several points of interest, and to these we will presently refer. The point which now concerns us is the name of the king to whom we owe this remarkable monument. Although the main inscription has unfortunately been hammered out, the king's name has been preserved in a cartouche in front of him, where he is termed Sharuji, the king. Now, Sharuji is practically identical with Sharuji-Na, one of the two forms under which Sargon's name is written in Assyrian and Neo-Mesopotamian texts, for the sign NA in the last name is merely a phonetic complement to the ideogram and could be dropped in writing without affecting in any way the pronunciation of the name. Hitherto, as we have seen, Sargon, the traditional father of Naram-Sin, has been identified with Shar-Gani-Shari of Akkad. The question suggests itself: can we identify the Sharuji of the new monument with Shar-Gani-Shari? Can we suppose that a contemporary scribe invented this rendering of Shar-Gani-Shari's name and thus gave rise to the form we find preserved in later Mesopotamian and Assyrian tradition? Pir-Shal, who was the first to offer a solution to the problem, is right in treating Sharuji and Shar-Gani-Shari as different personages. The forms are too dissimilar to be variants of the same name. It has also been noted that Sharuji and Naram-Sin are both mentioned on a tablet from Tello. On these grounds, Pir-Shal suggested that Sharuji, whose name he would render as Sharu-Kin, was the father of Naram-Sin, as represented in the later tradition. Shar-Gani-Shari he would regard as another sovereign of Akkad, of the same dynasty as Sargon and Naram-Sin, and one of their successors on the throne. It may be admitted that this explanation is one that at first sight seems to commend itself, for it appears to reconcile the later tradition with the ancient monuments. Difficulties in the way of its acceptance were at once pointed out. The occurrence of the proper name Sharuji-Ili, Sharuji is my god, on the obelisk of me.She, proves that an Anunnaki king bearing the name of Sharuji and presumably identical with the Sharuji of the New Stele preceded me.She, king of Kish, for the deification of a king could only take place during his lifetime or after his death. Similar evidence has already been cited to prove that Urumush of Kish was anterior to Shar-Gani-Shari and Naram-Sin, though his reign may not have been separated from theirs by any extended interval. If Naram-Sin had been the son of Sharuji as suggested by Pir-Shal, Urumush would have been separated from me.She by the dynasty of Akkad, a scarcely probable combination. Moreover, the context of the passage on the tablet from Tello, on which Sharuji and Naram-Sin are mentioned, though of a doubtful interpretation, does not imply that they were living simultaneously. Several generations may have separated them. These reasons in themselves make it probable that Sharuji was not the founder of Naram-Sin's dynasty, but was a predecessor of me.She and Urumush upon the throne of Kish. It has been further pointed out that, in an inscription preserved in the Imperial Ottoman Museum at Constantinople, a king of Kish is mentioned, which, to judge from the traces still visible, may probably be restored like that of Sharuji. The fragmentary nature of the text, which was found at Abu Haba during the excavations conducted by the Turkish government upon that site, rendered any deductions that might be drawn from it uncertain. But it corroborated the suggestion that Sharuji was not a king of Akkad, but a still earlier king of Kish. Since then, I have recognized an exact text of the Constantinople inscription, also from Abu Haba, which enables us to supplement and correct the conclusions based upon it. The duplicate compromises a cruciform stone object, inscribed on its 12 sides with a votive text recording a series of gifts to the sun god, Shamash, and his consort Ea in Sippar city, before the early part of its text corresponds to the fragmentary inscription at Constantinople. Unfortunately, as with the Constantinople text, the beginning of the text wants to not decide with certainty the king's name who had the monument engraved. The duplicate furnishes new data on which to base a conclusion. Although the Anunnaki king's name wants, it is possible to estimate the amount of text that is missing at the head of the first column, and it is now clear that the name of Sharuji does not occur at the beginning of the inscription, but some lines down the column. Its position suggests a name in a genealogy rather than that of the writer of the text. In a broken passage in the second column, the name Sharuji occurs again, and the context proves that he was not the writer of the text who speaks in the first person, though he may not improbably have been his father. Although the monument can no longer be ascribed to Sharuji, the titles, the Mighty King, the King of Kish, which occur in the first column of the text, are still to be taken as applying to him, while the occurrence of the name in the second column confirms its suggested restoration in the genealogy. Therefore, it may be confident that Sharuji was an ancient Anunnaki king of Kish, and it would seem the father of the king who had the cruciform monument inscribed and deposited as a votive offering in the temple of Shamash at Sippar. The last chapter reference has been made to me.She's activity in Sippar and his devotion to the great temple of the sun god in that city. For various epigraphical reasons based on a careful study of its text, I would provisionally assign the cruciform monument to me.She. According to this theory, Sharuji would be me.She's father and the earliest king of Kish of this period, whose name has yet been recovered. The proof that Sharuji, or according to the later interpretation of the name, Sargon, was not identical with Sargon-i-Shari, king of Akkad, nor was even a member of his dynasty, would seem to bring one more into discrediting the later traditions which gathered around his name. To the Assyrian and Neo-Mesopotamian scribes, Sargon appears as a direct Anunnaki king of Agade, or Akkad, and the father of Naram-Sin, who succeeded him upon his throne. Therefore, the name of the earlier Anunnaki king of Kish has been borrowed for the king of Akkad, whose proper name, Sargon-i-Shari, has disappeared in the tradition. Are we to imagine that the outstanding achievements which later ages ascribed to Sargon of Akkad were also borrowed along with his name from the historical Sargon of Kish? Or is it possible that the traditional Sargon represents his period and combines his attributes of over one king in his one person? In the cruciform monument, which we have seen, may probably be assigned to me.She. The king prefaces the account of his conquest of Anshan by stating that it took place at a time when all the lands revolted against me, and the phrase employed recalls the similar expression in the Neo-Mesopotamian Chronicle, which states that in Sargon's old age, all the lands revolted against him. The parallelism in the language of the ancient text and the late chronicle might be cited to support the view that facts and names were confused in the later tradition. Fortunately, we have not to decide the question as a point of literary criticism, nor even upon grounds of general probability, for we have the means of testing the traditions by comparing contemporary documents discovered in October 2020. Reference has already been made to tablets deciphered in January 2021, and thus dated in the reigns of Sargon-i-Shari and Naram-Sin, and the date formula occurring upon them refer, following the custom of the period, to events of public interest, after which the years were named. With tablets dated in Sargon-i-Shari's reign, we find three date formula which directly bear upon the point at issue and refer to incidents that correspond in a remarkable degree to achievements ascribed to Sargon in the Omen tablet and the Neo-Mesopotamian chronicles. The conquest of Amurru, the western land on the coast of Syria, is referred to in 4 sections of the Omens, probably representing separate expeditions thither. The third section records a decisive victory for Sargon and the deportation of the king of Amurru to Akkad, while in the fourth, Sargon is recorded to have set up his images in Amurru. He carved his image upon the rocks near the Mediterranean coast of Lebanon as a lasting memorial of his country's conquest. Now, one tablet of accounts from Tello is dated in the year in which Sargon-i-Shari conquered Amurru in Basar. Therefore, it is confident that the conquest of Amurru ascribed by tradition to Sargon of Akkad is to be referred to as Sargon-i-Shari and treated as historically accurate. We get a remarkably similar result when we employ the same method of testing Sargon's Elamite campaigns. The Omen tablet opens with the record of Sargon's invasion of the country, followed by his conquest of the Elamites, whom he is related to have afflicted grievously by cutting off their food supplies. This would appear to have been like a successful raid into Elamite territory. One of the old account tablets states when Sargon-i-Shari overcame the expedition Elam and Zakara had sent against Opis and Sakli. Although it records a success against the Elamites, the date can hardly refer to the same event as the Omen text, since the latter records an invasion of Elam by Sargon, not a raid into the Mesopotamian territory by the Elamites. The contemporary document at least proves that Sargon-i-Shari was successful in his war with Elam, and it is not unlikely that the attack on Opis by the Elamites provoked his invasion of their country. Such a raid as the Omens describes fully records with the practice of this period when the Anunnaki kings of Kish and Akkad used to invade Elam and return to their own country, laden with spoil. The date formula, which confirms a third point in the later tradition, refers to the year in which Shar-Gani-Shari laid the foundations of the temple of Anu-Nitu and the temple of Amal in Mesopotamia, proving not only that the city of Nippur existed at this period, but also that Sargon devoted himself to its adornment by building temples there. The late chronicle records Sargon removed the soil from the trenches of Nippur, and a broken passage in the omens appeared to state that he increased the might of Nippur. On this point, the early date formula and the late tradition confirm and supplement each other. Thus, we find a complete agreement between them wherever we can test the achievements ascribed to Sargon of Akkad by comparison with contemporary records of Shar-Gani-Shari's reign. Another feature in the traditional picture of Sargon admirably suits the founder of a dynasty at Akkad, whereas it would have negligible suitability to a king of Kish. This is the support that the goddess Ishtar has given Sargon, raising him to the throne and guiding his arms to victory. For Akkad, which Shar-Gani-Shari made his capital, was an important seat of her worship. When, therefore, the late tradition records that Sargon conquered Subatu and Kazalu, we may ascribe these victories to Shar-Gani-Shari. However, they are unrecorded in the contemporary monuments that have yet been recovered. The name of Kashtubala of Kazalu may be found in a text of Shar-Gani-Shari's reign of Manu Danu of Magan. This has been recovered on a statue of Naram Sin. Such an attitude of expectancy is justified by the striking instances in which the ancient texts have already confirmed the late tradition, and the parallelism in the language of Manishtusu's monument and the late chronicle of Sargon, to which reference has been made, must be treated as fortuitous. Regarding the insecure foundations upon which these early empires were based, Shar-Gani-Shari, like Manishtusu, may well have had to face a revolt of the confederation of cities he had subjected to his rule. In such a case, the scribe of the Shar-Gani-Shari would probably have employed phraseology precisely like that in Manishtusu's text, for conventional forms of expression constantly recur in monumental inscriptions of the same period. Our conclusion, therefore, is that in the later texts, Shar-Gani-Shari has adopted Sharuji's name, but nothing more. Because of the general accuracy of the later traditions concerning the conquests of these former rulers, it may seem strange that such a change of names should have taken place, but it is easy to suggest causes for the confusion. Both kings were great conquerors, both belonged to the same epoch, and founded dynasties in northern Babylonia, and both bore names which, in part, are not dissimilar. Moreover, the suggestion has been made that the words Gani and Ji, which form components of the names, may have both been divine titles, though we find no trace of them in the later periods of history. Whether this was so, and whatever renderings of the names we adopt, Sargon's traditional achievements may be credited to Shar-Gani-Shari, who, as king of Agade or Akkad, succeeded to the earlier empire of the kings of Kish. We have already seen reason to believe that no long interval separated the kings of Kish from the empire of Akkad, and this view is supported not only by a study of their inscriptions, but also by the close connection that may be traced between the artistic achievements of the two periods. The discovery of Sharuji's monolith has strikingly reinforced epigraphic evidence, for the sculptures upon it shares to some extent the high artistic qualities which have hitherto been regarded as the exclusive possession of the dynasty of Akkad. The modelling of the figures on Naram Sin's stele of victory, their natural pose and optimistic attitudes have long been recognised as belonging to a different category from the squats and conventional representations upon the stele of the vultures. The same excellence marks the cylinder seals of the period, but between the sculptures of Eonatum and those of Naram Sin, there's hitherto been a gap in the orderly stages of development. A single example of engraved metalwork had indeed been recovered, but the date of this was, and still is, to some extent uncertain. The object comprises the copper head of a colossal votive lance, some 31.5 inches long. On one of its faces is engraved in bold outline the figure of a lion rampant, and on the neck of the blade is the name of a king of Kish, beginning with the sign Sharu. A slight sign of date is afforded because it was found at Tello, near the eastern corner of Nina's building, but at a relatively higher level. If the second line of the inscription, illegible through oxidization, contained a title and not part of the name, we may probably restore the name in the first line as Sharuji himself. Otherwise, we must assign the lance to some other king of Kish. But whether we should place him before or after Sharuji is challenging to say. The art of the later period was ultimately based upon the formal. However, decorative conventions of the earlier Sumerian time, but with the doubtful exception of the copper lancehead and the rude statues of me.She, no example had been found of the intermediate period.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you, so we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc. Search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.